Good morning. This past year has brought renewed fears of widespread infectious diseases, everything from the relatively exotic Ebola to the once nearly eradicated measles. So I was a bit concerned that when you saw the sermon title, Catch It, Spread It, there might be a stampede out of the building. But rest assured, you have not stumbled into a scary chapter from a medical text on epidemiology. However, the sermon is about contagion of a different kind that can be either beneficial or detrimental to our health. About 6 weeks ago, I was driving along with my radio set to WITF's programming, and as I tuned in, the moderators, Alex Spiegel and Lulu Miller, switched to a recorded segment of the old Candid Camera television show. This was the one with Alan Funt that some others here today are old enough to remember as one of the first reality TV shows. The voice of Alan Funt sets up the scenario of a man entering an elevator with a hidden camera rolling. The man predictably turns around after he enters the elevator and faces front as the doors close. Then enter two Candid Camera staff members who board the elevator at the next floor and continue to face the back of the elevator as the doors close. The first man, though looking puzzled, continues to face front. When the elevator stops at the next floor, a third Candid Camera actor comes in and joins the other two facing the back. Now the poor guy who entered first can't take it anymore. He slowly turns to conform to the position of the others. But the dance goes on. As soon as the first man turns to face the back of the elevator, the other three Candid Cameras riders turn and face the front. And you guessed it, the poor guy doesn't hesitate, but turns immediately to face the front with the other riders. And it continues. The first rider has a hat on, and when the others take off their hats, he takes off his hat as well. And so it goes. Candid Camera did a series of segments replicating this scenario, and the phenomenon of mirroring was repeated again and again. The NPR host then introduced two psychological researchers from the University of Hawaii, Elaine Hatfield and her husband-colleague, Dick Rapson. Hatfield and Rapson, whose research dates back to 1993, explained that this mirroring is more than a desire to conform. It is what is termed emotional contagion. According to their definition, emotional contagion is the tendency to automatically mimic and synchronize expressions, vocalizations, postures, and movements with those of another person's, and consequently, to converge emotionally. In other words, we are so wired to sync up with others that we mimic not only their physical attributes, but the emotions that they evoke. And we do it so fast that it cannot possibly be conscious. For example, they say, if you're talking to a friend over time, you will begin to blink as one. Or if you watch someone stutter, the tiny muscles of your mouth will start to twitch. They even found that people in the same room begin to adopt the breathing patterns of one another as well. All I could picture were some of the administrative meetings I sat through when the boss was not happy with our performance. If we had mimicked each other's breathing, we would all have been hyperventilating into paper bags. Now, this knowledge isn't new. As early as 1759, the economic philosopher Adam Smith noted that as people imagine themselves in another's situation, they display, in his words, motor mimicry. With advanced technology and research tools, scientists have discovered that we actually have mirror neurons. In January 2005, a PBS Nova segment explored this monkey see, monkey do world of mirror neurons with, well, monkeys. A group of researchers in Parma, Italy, wired monkeys' brains to track neurons that fired, making a clack, clack, clack sound when the monkeys grabbed peanuts that were placed in their cages. So the scientists assumed that it was a motor neuron firing when the monkeys moved. However, they continued the experiment and had the monkeys watch as a human grabbed the peanut and clack, clack, clack. The same neuron fired in the monkeys' brains when they watched the human grab the peanut as when the monkeys grabbed them themselves. Since the monkey hadn't moved, the scientists discovered that this neuron couldn't tell the difference between seeing something and doing something. Seeing and doing were the same. Or more intriguingly, that for this neuron, watching somebody do something is just like doing it yourself. Furthermore, the scientists discovered that this neuron mirroring isn't just a monkey thing. It is a human thing as well. I was very heartened by this discovery. It explains why I can simply watch my exercise DVD without actually doing the exercises and feel that I have done something to benefit my overall health, preferably while eating a handful of peanuts. Clack, clack, clack. It explains why sports fans connect so viscerally with the play taking place on the field and catch the spirit of those around them. It lets us cry with the dying heroine in the movie. It helps us to learn, to transmit culture, to empathize, and project ourselves into the world. It connects us emotionally to those around us. As the NOVA segment continues, the researcher Marco Iacoboni from the University of California, Los Angeles, conducts an experiment with the NOVA moderator, Robert Krulwich, wish they had easier names, to demonstrate how the motor system and the emotional system are connected. Krulwich is placed in a powerful MRI brain scanner that monitors his brain while it is working. Iacoboni places special goggles on Krulwich, projecting faces expressing different emotions. Krulwich is instructed to mimic the expressions while Iacoboni monitors the mirroring parts of Krulwich's brain. Next, Iacoboni shows Krulwich the same faces, but instructs him not to make the same expression. Even though Krulwich is not moving his face, the same reaction occurs in his neurons as when he mimics the emotions. However, while the same emotional part of his brain lights up when he only looks at the expressions, the firing is more dramatic when he actually makes the same face. But the implications for mirror neurons go far beyond joining the wave at the Penn State game. Researchers are exploring whether children with autism have a deficiency in mirror neurons that allow them to flourish intellectually but create roadblocks to social interaction. Other social scientists suggest that our highly developed mirror neurons are part of what sets us apart from other primates. We are the laughing primate, we are the speaking primate, but we are also the primate that can transmit culture and experience through imitation. We don't need to evolve over generations to develop a heavy fur coat to protect us from the cold and help us survive. We can make a fur coat, unless we're UU cave people, and teach our offspring to make a coat in one generation. We are wired to connect, to interact, to live in groups. So how could this go wrong? Take a leap from the coat-making caveman to the social networkers of today. In 2014, Facebook conducted a massive and highly controversial psychological experiment using over 689,000 users. 2 academics and a Facebook scientist set out to discover whether emotional contagion can occur between individuals by using an automated system to manipulate the emotional content in Facebook news feeds. They found that when they manipulated user timelines to reduce positive expressions displayed by others, and this is a quote from the study, people produced fewer positive posts and more negative posts. When negative expressions were reduced, the opposite pattern occurred. In other words, Facebook can make you feel good or bad just by tweaking what shows up in your news feed. The study itself exploded on social media ranking as the most popular article ever tracked from the journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the United States of America, not something most people pick up on an everyday basis. This now moves emotional contagion outside of in-person interaction between individuals to a massive effect size generated across a network. Clearly, the power of emotional contagion can be used for either positive or negative effect. A controversial marketing study also published last year advises companies to tailor their product promotion to synchronize with days on which women generally feel better or worse about themselves. On Mondays, evidently, when studies indicate that women feel more vulnerable, companies should focus on tips and tricks for beauty rescues, dressing for success, and empowering strategies. On Thursdays, when we feel less confident, companies should align their marketing with weekend guides, social activities, and style tips for social events. Feel like a lab rat yet, ladies? Then don't Google the blog on how to manipulate women to be receptive to dating adventures through emotional contagion. These illustrations may sound simply like techniques for persuasion or propaganda, depending on which side you're on. But pair that marketing study with the results of the Facebook study, and marketers may not need to rely on any natural cycle of attitude on a given day, but may be able to create emotional responses and target those emotions simply by manipulating the data social networkers receive. In other words, I can make you feel vulnerable to make you more susceptible to whatever product or service I'm pushing. But if emotional contagion can work against us, I got to thinking about how it can work in our favor and in the interests of those we influence. One of the advantages of our community here is that we have some emotional contagion spreading not only through the congregation, but through our contacts with others in the wider community. Those who have joined gatherings in town parks for peace and tolerance, those who have contributed time and resources for the Love Flows projects, those who have joined in the Charities of the Month with the Social Concerns Committee. All of these endeavors and so many others are efforts to spread a contagion of tolerance, compassion, and aid to those in need. We have instinctively known the power of emotional contagion, even if we didn't know the science or the name for it. We warn our children to hang with those kids who will help them engage in wholesome, ethical, and healthful activities. We try to avoid those businesses or workplaces or individuals that are petri dishes of negativity. This doesn't mean that we need to be blind optimists refusing to recognize or empathize with those in distress. But it means that we need to find ways to engender positive emotions and protect ourselves and others from descending into what John Bunyan called the slough of despond in the Pilgrim's Progress. When I taught public speaking to high school seniors, we had a unit on persuasion. I always included a section on propaganda techniques, not only so they could use them in their speeches, ethically of course, but also so they could be aware of how they were bombarded daily by others who would try to convince them to do or believe something. Awareness is the first step in controlling how we respond and how we attempt to influence others. We live in a world now where we move against a continual flow of information. We have 24/7 access to weather, news, pop culture, and the minutiae of others' everyday lives. When we recognize the existence and power of emotional contagion, we're better able to inoculate ourselves against the damaging influences and are able to maximize our chances of spreading a contagion of humanity, kindness, and compassion. Our community at UUCSV allows us to retain our individual beliefs and values while guided by common goals. One researcher likened the effects of emotional contagion to a collection of individuals working as one organism, with all the power and influence that such unity can bring. Recently, my daughter and I were watching those massive flocks of migrating birds that turn and swoop in formation in a seemingly random yet choreographed sequence. This isn't the wedge flying of geese, which we know has a certain energy-conserving quality necessary for migration. This movement, like schools of fish, dips and dives, swerves and lights in one obviously non-verbal communication. Research by Wayne Potts published in the journal Nature in 1984 explains, the highly coordinated movements of flocks of birds or schools of fish are among the most fascinating phenomena to be found in nature. The group seems to turn and maneuver as a single unit, changing direction almost instantaneously, leading some researchers to hypothesize that electromagnetic communication or even thought transference must be involved. In reality, this behavior results from far less mysterious causes. Such movements are a prime example of emergent behavior. The behavior is not a property of any individual bird, but rather emerges as a property of the group itself. There is no leader, no overall control. Instead, the flock's movements are determined by the moment-by-moment decisions of individual birds, following simple rules in response to interactions with their neighbors in the flock. He goes on to describe how no one bird emerges as a constant leader, but that different birds assume the role of cruise or flight director. One of the advantages to this flocking instinct is that it protects individual birds from the threat of attack by predators. Interestingly, birds tend to follow the leader who turns into the flock rather than a bird that turns away from the flock, because the risk of disrupting their protection is greater. I think there is some sort of tortured analogy to our congregation and these birds of flocking together with the same feathers. We certainly are a brightly colored flock with different feathers and nesting habits, but we find here a coordinated movement toward goals supported by our affirmations. Our communal gathering provides us with a strength and protection from individual attacks that attempt to infect us and those around us with negative energy. So this is a great place to catch a fever for outreach and to spread it to the wider community in which we live. But to be most contagious, we can't simply sit and watch others do the work like the monkey neurons clacking away as the researchers grab the peanuts. We need to engage our hearts, our minds, our bodies, and even our facial expressions to get a UU epidemic going. Clack, clack, clack.